This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
When the headlines divide us, creativity can bring us together.
If I know something that's really precious to you, and you know something that's really precious to me, we start off having a much better conversation.
That was renowned cellist Yo-Yo Ma on the podcast Spark and Fire, where iconic creators share the story of bringing one beloved work to life. Spark and Fire is a Wait What original in partnership with the BBC. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Wake Up to Money from BBC 5 Live.
Hello, welcome to Wake Up to Money. On the show today, after a pledge to consign coal to the history books, the commodity is making a comeback in Cumbria. I'll be taking a look at what it might mean for the economy locally, nationally, globally. Those net zero targets, of course, a key part of all of that. Now, is your Christmas getaway in jeopardy? I would like your thoughts on this. 85058. If you've seen any cancellations, if you are planning any cancellations, strikes by border force workers could mean flights are cancelled over the festive period. And the documentary that's been in the papers all week finally drops.
When the stakes are this high, doesn't it make more sense to hear our story from us?
But what could the £82 million deal with Harry and Meghan actually bring for Netflix?
Wake Up to Money with Sean Farrington.
Good morning to you. So there we go. Are your Christmas holidays been ruined because of strikes? Are you subscribing to Netflix you might not have done before? Is it going to be the thing that entices you in to making a subscription? Is the new Harry and Meghan documentary, or is it the thing that's making you get rid? Do you have a view on it? Why do you think Netflix might want a bit of that? We've got plenty on the show this morning. We've got experts, particularly we had a sensational hour with a bloke who was from an insulation company a week or so ago, answering all of your questions. A whole variety of questions on what can be done in your home insulation-wise to help your heating. But today we've got a plumber on the show before 6 o'clock, just after 5:30, who'll be, again, answering your questions. So if you're waking up this morning after a cold night, and it was a colder night for much of the country last night, and it's set to be a cold morning and a cold few days as well, it may have been that the last couple of days are the point, actually, of the autumn-winter transition, where people who have been holding off from, well, even having the heating on in the first place, to turning up the heating a little bit more, to having it on that little bit longer, it's got to the point we've seen the official advice now from the authorities across the country saying, don't hold back on putting your heating on now because temperatures are getting so low in certain places. So if you're feeling a bit uncomfortable about doing that and would like some advice plumbing wise, but these people, you get them around the house, they have a good idea about anything in your house as well. So any of your questions about how to keep your house warm, keep your costs efficient at the moment, we've got a plumber on after 5:30. 85058. Send me your messages, all playing into the whole energy conversation at the minute. I don't know, do you remember as a kid popping another lump of coal on the fire? Lots of households have those little brass holders with the dustbin and brush to sweep up the soot and poker to stoke the fires still, do they? I am told. But was that ever actually in use in your lifetime? We had one of those gas fires that you had to click a million times, and it sort of had that, I don't even know what it was made of, that polystyrene thing burning at the front. Anyway, recent years, coal fires have been replaced with gas or log burners. We've seen many more of those, a bit more modern ones now. Restrictions were brought in last year on the sale of house coal for health reasons. It's making a bit of a comeback, though, coal, that is, and the mining of it. Last night, the government gave the green light to the first UK coal mine in 30 years in Cumbria. Now, this isn't for your living room. This is going to be largely used for steel production overseas and probably in the UK as well, if they can make that work rather than in homes. It's hugely controversial. It was approved in 2020. Then it was suspended last year ahead of the climate conference, COP26 in Glasgow. You might remember the controversies around that, and then it ends up being suspended. The plan is it will create about 500 jobs in Cumbria. We're told it will seek to be carbon neutral. The Shadow Secretary for Climate Change, Ed Miliband, called that claim dodgy accounting.
It's a terrible decision for our energy policy, for our climate policy, and it won't provide the jobs that people in Cumbria need. The idea that this is not terrible for climate change, this is the equivalent of putting 2 million extra cars on the road.
It does have some community support. Mike Starkey is the Conservative Mayor of Copeland, where the mine will be located. He told us the announcement was great news.
I'm absolutely delighted. I've been inundated with messages from across my community tonight, and we've got a community in celebration about one of the biggest positive economic impacts on our area in a generation. This is fantastic news for West Cumbria and for our community.
Well, it's a fascinating development, isn't it? 85058 this morning. If you're in the area, do you share that optimism or not? If you're not in the area, but you're still very interested in the idea that we're opening up a coal mine and starting up a new one for the first time in 30 years here in the UK, 85058. Your thoughts on this? It's just interesting looking at some of the reaction from the business world yesterday. The CBI, of course, we speak to the CBI a fair bit on Wake Up to Money. Their chief economist there, Ray Newton-Smith, was tweeting in the aftermath of the announcement. It's a huge step backwards. Coal hugely damaging. We have the resources in the UK to accelerate our investment in renewables, not go backwards. A sad day for our climate leadership. Sends the wrong signal on policy. Business want more climate leadership, not less. 85058 this morning. Does this mean that we can't do that? Claire Daniels with me on the show to discuss a variety of things. Chief Executive of the Leeds-based Trio Media, which is a digital marketing agency taken over by Claire 5 years ago. Good morning to you, Claire.
Morning, Sean. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. What do you think of this one, Claire? When you saw the headlines, you may have got the BBC News notification on your smartphone yesterday evening. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I agree with the headlines you just read about being a massive step backwards. You know, it feels like we've moved on from this, and actually, especially in business, this isn't what we want to see. I'd be really keen to hear if you do get texts in from people saying that they're delighted about it and the support in the local area, but it just doesn't feel right. And, you know, the news clip played at the start of the show, it's been justified by how much we already import coal. But actually, we're not using the coal here. We're using it to export. So actually, it feels like it's just about making money and it's not about energy or climate at all. And when we look at the amount of greenhouse gas emissions it's going to release, you know, I think it's going to have a massive impact. And I can't possibly see how this will be a neutral climate activity. You know, I would really have hoped for better for us by now.
Jane Sydenham on the show as well this morning, Investment Director at Rathbones Investment Management. Good morning, Jane.
Good morning.
So we've talked a lot in recent months about how much we should be relying upon fossil fuels in the short term, maybe more than we previously intended because of the amount that gas prices have gone up around the world, et cetera, et cetera. Is all of that playing into this decision, you think? The fact that, you know, maybe why things have changed compared to a year ago?
I think it is. I mean, you know, there are all sorts of, this is a very complicated or complex situation, but one of the reasons that we've had this spike in energy prices after the invasion of Ukraine, of course, is that, you know, there's insufficient capacity, energy capacity for gas and oil today because a lot of investment's been going into renewables. And so the pressure's really come on. Getting this balance right between having enough traditional fossil fuels but also investing fast enough in renewables and not having a gap in the meantime that causes these price stresses is really complicated. So, you know, this is sort of part of trying to strike that balance, but it is incredibly complicated and I can see why it's causing controversy and confusion.
Claire, how do you feel generally about the UK's approach to climate change? I mean, before this announcement, you're clearly not happy with this particular announcement, but did you feel like we were on the right track?
Not really, to be honest. I mean, I am someone who is very passionate about the planet and climate, and actually, I'm trying to get involved in a lot of business initiatives, and I'm seeing that a lot of businesses are saying we want more, and as businesses, we're prepared to do more, but there doesn't seem to be much outline for actions that we can take. So now these groups of people, these organisations, these charities taking it upon themselves to go, okay, we're going to handle this ones ourselves, and what can we do about it? Because I just don't feel that we're acting fast enough. I feel like a lot of lip service is being paid, but I'm not really seeing anything that is going to have a dramatic impact coming out of the government currently.
Well, 85058 this morning, if you'd like to let me know your thoughts on this. If you are in the Cumbria area, as Clem's saying, it'd be really interesting to hear. If you support this yourself, let us know what you feel the advantages would be. West Cumbria Mining, which is the authority, the business that will be overseeing this, says the coking coal it produces will be used for steel making in the UK and Europe. The council has granted permission for digging for this coking coal, as it's called. That reminds you of your school days, learning how all of these work, until 2049. So with the mine expected to create about 500 jobs, the two companies that will still make steel using coal in the UK, which is British Steel and Tata, say they plan to move to lower carbon production methods. Steel industry reckons that they'll use less than 10% of the output of the mine by the mid-2030s, none at all. I mean, some saying don't worry too much about this. This is actually a drop in the ocean in terms of the whole approach that the UK will have in the long run. And if there are enough renewables out there for our energy production, we won't even really be needing this mine. But still, a major decision to have been made by the government right now. Right, let's talk about strikes again, as we have been a lot in recent days. More strikes, this time at major airports expected in December. Border Force staff will strike for 8 days between the 23rd of December and New Year's Eve. So the union, the PCS, said its members working at Gatwick, Heathrow, Manchester, Birmingham, Glasgow and Cardiff, whose main duties are to check passports for those arriving in the country, they will walk out. So there's a warning it will mean flights will be cancelled. It will also affect New Haven Port as well. This comes amid pressure on the Prime Minister from his own party to rush through anti-strike legislation. This is what Rishi Sunak had to say more generally.
If the union leaders to continue to be unreasonable, then it is my duty to take action to protect the lives and livelihoods of the British public. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, since I became Prime Minister, I have been working for new, tough laws to protect people from this disruption.
Now, I've got the independent aviation consultant, John Strickland, with me now. Morning, John.
Morning, Sean.
Morning. Thanks for being with us, John, on Wake Up to Money this morning. If people are seeing this and they have a flight in December, between the 23rd of December, particularly and New Year's Eve, at one of those airports I mentioned, what is the realistic level of disruption they can expect at the moment?
It's difficult to tell. Obviously, there's still 2 or 3 weeks to go before this peak Christmas travel period, and obviously it's an emotional time of year for many people travelling for their first trip home or first holiday for some time, not least after the pandemic period of lockdown, and indeed a difficult summer this year when people have travelled. But we've seen a lot of dislocation at airports with flights being delayed and cancelled. Obviously, as you said in your introduction, the Border Force staff deal with arriving passenger passport checks, and many UK passport holders can use these automatic passport check machines these days, so they don't actually have to deal with a person. Those machines should do the job, but of course sometimes they're not all put into use or may actually be broken, and that then does put pressure on the actual human way of doing it as in the past. And if you're not a UK passport holder, it certainly doesn't give a good impression for your visit into the UK if you're in a massive queue at the airport waiting to have your passport checked. And of course, travel does peak in that period just before Christmas and indeed through the whole holiday period.
Yeah, so people thinking, right, this is only affecting those, arriving in the country with passport checks. Does that mean that your journey out of the country can be affected as a consequence of this?
I wouldn't expect that ordinarily. The only challenge could be if the strike took place, and again, depending on how much of the automated machines are used at the different airports affected, if we got a situation where queues just build up and up and up, and that has happened in the past, where queues are extending way back down the corridors, even to the arrival gates of aircraft. If that means that aircraft cannot be accessed for cleaning and preparation for the next flights, then it can knock on and cause delays to those flights, or in the worst case, cancellations. And obviously, that's the last thing that anybody wants. Airlines themselves. Christmas is really a brief period of possible profitability in a bleak winter period. But if they don't have the ability to get those aircraft prepared, ultimately there is that risk.
And where is the aviation industry with the possibility of filling in these jobs if people are on strike? Is it the kind of role that can be filled by agency staff, or is training and long-term training a key part of this role?
Well, the key thing about this dispute, it's a dispute with the government, because these are civil servants employed not by the airlines or the airports. It's completely out of the hands of the players in the industry, and that's why it's doubly frustrating that either the airlines, the airports, the customers should be affected by a dispute which effectively has a political origin. It really is something that needs to be sorted out away from the general public and not inflicted upon them. Of course, the government has in the past been quick to point the finger at the industry for not getting its act together during the summer, which is somewhat disingenuous because we had very late cancellation of COVID restrictions well after the normal planning cycle for resources in airlines and airports in terms of manpower, recruitment and training. But this is now out of their hands, and indeed much has been done in recent months for the same airlines and airports to get themselves back into a good working state, and flights are running much more smoothly than they were over the worst periods of the summer. But this would completely throw the spanner in the works, of course.
Claire Daniels, who's with me this morning, boss of Trio Media in Leeds. Claire, you got any winter break plans? Any flights to be taken in the coming weeks?
Well, no, I'm pleased I don't. Obviously I can see it from both sides. There's going to be a lot of people that are really disappointed to have travel plans disrupted or cancelled, but also people deserve to be paid fairly. I mean, the two stories we've just spoken about, I feel overlap. We're saying 500 jobs are going to be created in a coal mine. Who are we going to get to work in a coal mine when, we're short-staffed in the rest of the public sector and people don't want to work in those areas, or they're not getting paid well enough? So, it's troubling times.
Interesting. John, thanks so much. I'm sure there'll be something we'll talk about again in the coming weeks if it escalates, if it eases, if the issues come to fruition for passengers as well. John Strickland there, the independent aviation consultants, those border force staff who are going to strike for 8 days between the 23rd of December and New Year's Eve. Jane Sydenham from Rathbone Investment Management. Jane, are you starting to see the knock-on effect of the various strikes on businesses now? Is that something that you can see when you look at how businesses are performing?
It's still relatively early, and of course it's mostly in the public sector at the moment, really. So most of what we're looking at is really sort of private sector, but it will have an effect as time goes on, and certainly this border force issue is going to affect the travel industry that's been sort of struggling to get back on its feet quite significantly. As we move into the new year, that effect's going to start to come to the surface, because this is the period when most of the holiday bookings take place. So sort of early January, and if people are uncertain about whether they're going to get away and get back, they might delay those plans. So it sort of starts to come through. It takes a bit of time, but it's working its way through.
Yeah, I saw Moonpig, the personalised card retailer. It was warning yesterday sales would be lower than expected this year, and it sort of said part of that was because shoppers aren't spending as much as they were before, moving to lower price gifts, but also it said because of the Royal Mail postal strikes hitting the business. Which one would you give more weight to at the moment?
I imagine it's really more to do with less demand, but it's going to be both, but it's really less demand. I mean, I think people are beginning to really sort of cut back, so it is just starting to work its way through for sure.
And do you see that, and we get these results every morning at 7:00 with various companies telling us how they're getting on at the moment, the overall tone and the mood of those long page after page sets of results, would you say it is that their profits are going to be lower than they previously thought?
Yes, I mean, they're all starting to comment on a more difficult trading environment and uncertainties in 2023, and all of those kinds of statements. You're right; those are beginning to go into those results announcements. So it feels as though the reality is definitely following. We've all been looking forward and anticipating this, and now it is starting to actually have an effect.
Claire, do you see that, whether it's at Trio Media, your business itself, or clients that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, we're in quite a unique position. We work with a lot of smaller businesses, and actually we're not yet seeing the effect, and that might be where you see it hit a bit more, but actually there's a lot more agility in smaller businesses. So we have yet ourselves, and obviously that would be impacted by whether our clients were seeing an effect, to see a downward turn. So everything's good for us, good for our clients. People are continuing to invest and are kind of leaning into it. And actually that's what we recommend. The people that come out best during financial struggles are the people that do lean in, they continue to invest, and they're the winners at the end of it.
Going to completely change the topic for you here, Claire, but as the boss of a digital marketing agency, do you pay much attention to which words are the most Googled in a year?
We do look at stuff like that, yes. Obviously, we have to stay on top of it. We do a lot of search engine optimization and stuff like that. So we do need to know what's going on. Just don't quiz me on it today.
No, I'm not going to. Don't worry, I'm not going to quiz you. I just wonder how much. Apparently, Wordle was the top trending search term of the past 12 months. And I mean, it was definitely coming up on social media feeds and has peaked. And this is a bit of a global trend as well, given that it was picked up, I think, by the New York Times, ended up buying it. So it did very well for the fella in Wales who came up with the idea of the game during lockdown. But would that have been something in any way, when you're sitting there at your business, you and your colleagues, and you see over that particularly there was an intense period of time where everybody seemed to be attempting Wordle, sharing it on every WhatsApp group, letting you know how successful you'd been in the group, tweeting it. Every other tweet on your feed was about that. How does that get into, right, this is what we're going to do as a marketing business now? What is it that people want?
Yeah, well, ultimately, what worked well for Wordle was the virality of it. That you did talk about it, you shared it with others, because it was essentially a competition against others, because it was more than just a competition against yourself. And in any type of marketing, advertising, or even, when you're designing video games, anything like that is about capturing attention, the amount of time people want to spend on your app, on your product, and talking about it as well. So that's the kind of lesson learned, and how it translates into marketing is to create something. It can be very simple, but does it get people talking? Is it shareable, likable, and engaging enough to keep you there? And this is the thing. I mean, game designers, for example, and app designers, they are targeted on how addictive they can make those things. That their targets are based on time spent on the app. So that's the kind of lesson across marketing, really. It's all about engagement.
Jane, I'm not going to quiz you on the year's most Googled words either. I'm going to ask you something more solid ground for us both. Talk about mortgages, because the Financial Conduct Authority yesterday, Jane, was laying out and putting out this draft guidance to banks and lenders around the country about what to do if borrowers, particularly those with a mortgage, are struggling right now, and suggesting things like saying to the banks, let people go interest only. show forbearance. Don't go sort of just trying to take the home off them at the first sign of a missed payment. How different do you think this financial crunch for people will be this winter compared to maybe the last major one that we had after the financial crisis, where people saw mortgage, maybe not their costs change so much, but their affordability change drastically?
I mean, I think this one is more painful from a consumer perspective, because obviously interest rates went to incredibly low levels after the financial crisis. We put rates down to levels they haven't been at ever. So there wasn't the kind of same cash flow crunch. I mean, I think that's what's so difficult about where we are now, with high energy bills, high mortgage service costs. People are really feeling that squeeze in their pockets. In the last financial crisis, it was about downturn in company trading and people losing their jobs. So, they might not have had an income, but it wasn't so widespread across every consumer in the way that this is now. And so, it's quite right that the banks are sensitive and thoughtful in the way that they deal with their customers around their mortgage payments.
Just as I look at the papers this morning, the front page of the Daily Mail is not good for my brain this morning. It nothing to do with the content of the story. The headline is it's beginning to look a lot like a Christmas general strike, but they've said an Xmas general strike is what they've got on the front page. It just doesn't quite seem quite right there to me. Does anybody say an Xmas general strike, a Christmas general strike, and Christmas? I'm not too sure. Anyway, that isn't the most important aspect of the news we're talking about this morning, but I thought I'd share it just in case you see it at the front of a garage this morning and have the same thought as me. I'd like to know. Let me know. It's not just me who's a bit bamboozled by that one. 85058. I've had plenty of your messages coming through about Cumbria, about energy supply in the UK. We have got a plumber coming up on the programme. I can see some messages about eco-design properties as well. We've got a plumber coming up to take your questions. If you're starting to think, right, I need to step it up now, making my house that little bit more efficient quickly, there may be some tips that we can get out of Gemma Prosser, who's going to be with me in a few minutes' time as well, about what is it we can do in our home in the next few hours, days, weeks. What can we do to plan for the winters ahead? What's affordable? What might be out there subsidy-wise? You just get your questions in, 85058, and we will have lots of answers for you coming up.
Wake Up to Money with Sean Farrington.
Good morning. Welcome to Wake Up to Money. If you're just switching on, your alarm's just gone up, you're just coming around, it's 25 to 6 on this Thursday morning, the 8th of December. If you've been with us from the top, thank you. Thank you for your messages. Roger in Fleet's been in touch. Speaking of cold houses, he says, I clearly recall waking up to ice on the inside of the bedroom window as a child in the 1950s. How fortunate I am today in my mid-70s living in an eco-designed property. Roger, tell me more about that eco-designed property. What can we learn from it? I know if the whole thing was set out right from the start to be efficient, energy saving and all of that, that is a big help. But are there tips in there? Are there things that you do in your day-to-day life now that you might not have done in other houses because of what your house provides you? Chuck in your tips, because we're going to try and get as many as we can from Gemma Prosser, who's with me this morning, a plumber with 10 years experience working in the Carmarthenshire area of Wales. Good morning to you, Gemma.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for being with us this morning. Are you getting a lot of questions from every person you know at the moment?
Oh yes, definitely. It's that time of year, isn't it, where questions get asked from customers. So yeah.
And how is business right now?
Business is good. Lots of call outs. But yeah, feels good.
Well, and what kind of call outs is that necessarily? Is that emergency call outs, quick get rounds as a leak somewhere, or is this a sort of a thought out major job being done?
Nothing major as yet. Obviously the cold spell's only just started. So no, it's usually just boiler breakdowns, making sure people have got their heating running. So.
Well, yes, heating clearly is a massive one for people right now, isn't it? So the UK Health Security Agency says the time has come to make sure living rooms are heated during the day and that we heat bedrooms before going to sleep. Temperatures set to fall to -10 overnight in Scotland this week. Snow and ice expected across parts of the UK. Being cold poses serious risks to both health and the home. Here's Professor David Glue from the Leeds Beckett University Sustainability Institute.
The World Health Organization recommends a temperature of around 18 degrees for rooms that you're living in, and that's to allow your body to function normally. Below that, you are going to start to be exposed to higher risk of respiratory diseases. And if you go a bit lower still, below kind of 15 degrees, then you're starting to get into a bit more serious concerns around increases in blood pressure and potentially increasing risks of heart attacks and strokes. And if we go even further down the scale to kind of around below 10 degrees, that's when the risks of hypothermia start to increase.
So that is Professor David Glue laying out the health concerns, the risks, and why it's important to stay sufficiently warm in your home. But with energy costs so high, being able to pay the bills, it is a really big issue for so many people. I mean, we have so many messages in asking what people can do about all of this. Gemma, a few things I was thinking, right, over the years, why would I have ever called a plumber out or, being at home growing up, what would have been the reasons my mum has got a plumber out? And being proactive, I often, sort of would remember a plumber saying, if you've got a problem, right, this is what you need to do to try and avoid this next year. So coming into the winter, into the cold snap as we are now, what are the proactive things that people can be doing to avoid heating issues that they might get in the coming days because of the serious cold?
Pipe lagging, obviously, usually cold spots, which are like attics. They pipes can freeze up there. So obviously making sure the pipes are lagged, that will help massively.
So how straightforward is that? So if somebody hears that and goes, right, pen and paper, I'm listening to Gemma, pipe lagging. Yeah. Where do you go to get the stuff around your pipe, and what do you have to think about when you're doing that?
Obviously you kind of have to measure up the amount of pipe work, and then you can go to any plumbing merchant, builders merchants, any online retailer basically that sells building products. They'll do lagging. And then you measure up the pipe work, and then you get whatever you need really. And then it's basically it comes in a roll, and then you just sleeve the pipes. So it's pretty straightforward. It's definitely a big must. And it's quite a cheap version as well of trying to save the house basically from flooding.
And and is that any pipe you can see sort of visibly? Is that what you should be aiming for?
Not so much visibly, because obviously you wouldn't really do it with pipework in your living room. It's mainly, like I said, cold spots. So if you've got an outside tap, make sure that's all lagged up. Attic spaces where there's no heating, which can be cold spots as well. But yeah, they're mainly any pipework that's outside that are prone to the frost, and attic spaces.
Yeah. Am I right in saying don't go pouring a boiling kettle over a frozen pipe outside?
Yes, do not do that.
That's something I've been told repeatedly in my lifetime. Can you explain why not to do that?
It's called thermal shock. So basically, when a pipe's frozen and you're pouring boiling hot water over it, it causes it'll cause it to split. So basically, like glass, if you have hot water in a glass and you pour freezing cold water on it, it'll instantly crack. And that's the same type of thing with pipe work as well.
So if that materializes, if you people may well, I guess, be waking up this morning if we're seeing these considerably sub-zero temperatures that we haven't had this year yet, and getting something like that, what should be the first thing you do?
In what sense? Sorry.
if you have got, if they've ended up being frozen outside.
Oh, yeah. Lukewarm water, never boiling water. Lukewarm water would, it will stabilize the temperature in the pipe at a steady rate rather than, very quickly. So
There's I don't know if this is a maths puzzle or not for you, but you'll have at least a good gist of what's required here, Gemma. John in Bermondsy's been in touch saying, I've got a question for your plumber. Is it more cost effective to keep your heating on all day with the thermostat set at a reasonable temperature, say 20 degrees, or give it a blast every few hours to bring the temperature up higher, then cool down?
I wouldn't recommend 20 degrees, but I would say, for instance, how I've set mine at. So it's at 16 degrees when I'm not here. So if it does go below 16 degrees, which can be very unlikely, it'll obviously set up to 16 degrees. And when I'm home, my temperature set to 19 degrees, and I find that's ambient. That's an ambient temperature that I can sit in. I can put my my dressing gown, my trousers on, to, be comfortable in the house, and that's I'm more than in a happy temperature.
Makes sense. What can you do to damage, Gemma, for people who are still, despite the, there's official warnings from the Health Security Agency, to people who are thinking, I'll save some money by not having my central heating on at all right now. We've heard the health concerns and risks around doing that, as we heard from the professor at the university just before. But in terms of the potential cost risks to your house by not putting your central heating on, is that a thing? Can you do damage?
Yeah, of course you can. Obviously, if there's no water circulating, then obviously pipes will freeze easily. So obviously, a burst pipe in the house could cause, substantial damage to the property, which will cost you thousands. Obviously, there's poses a risk of damp being caused as well in the house, which obviously can cause a massive health risk. And obviously, it's not nice. So obviously, you'd want to, scrub the walls and paint, so that it's little costs like that can mount up as well, isn't it? If if you don't.
So it's not quite as straightforward as don't put the central heating on, I'm not going to get any more costs. You may actually be inducing other issues that you're going to have to pay more for in time as well. Interesting. Gemma, thank you so much. Can I sort of ask you just hover in the background a little bit, just in case we get more questions coming in the last sort of 15 minutes of the programme. I wonder, have you got a view actually, Gemma, on, when you see headlines, somebody who's clearly interested in the energy efficiency, energy saving and all of that, and to be a major part of your job. When you see, opening up a coal mine in Cumbria, and we've had people messaging this morning saying, it's easy for those well-paid jobs, condemning a new mine in Cumbria. Cumbria's crying out for high-paid jobs, or any jobs for that matter. Do you have a view on an opening up of a mine like that?
I didn't even know they're opening up a mine, but yeah, it's quite an odd opening, I suppose. I mean, it does create jobs, obviously, but again, in this day and age, who will want to go down to in a coal mine?
Well, there will be some big questions about how exactly it's going to be carried out, because I'm pretty sure it won't be the same as the images we sort of all have of the through the 70s and 80s, and as the coal industry declined in the UK. But the West Cumbria mining project near Whitehaven, this project got the green light yesterday after the government agreed with the planning inspector's evaluation of the proposal. The project will dig coking coal, which is used for making steel. The government says it will be used both in the UK and exported to Europe. We chatted about the controversies around this a bit earlier in the show. I've got Javier Blas with me, who's energies and commodities columnist at Bloomberg. Good morning to you, Javier.
Good morning.
Morning. We've spoken a lot this year, Javier, about gas prices, about oil prices, not so much about coal prices and the worth of doing this stuff. What did you make of the UK going, yeah, we're going to open up a mine because we feel like there's demand for it around Europe?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as interesting as it was the government decision to approve the construction of this mine, it was also the reasoning of why the government was doing it. And And that reasoning is laid out on a 419 pages document, which we don't have to read completely, but suffice to say that there is one part of that document that says need for coal. And the government essentially lays the case that coal, and in this case coking coal or metallurgical coal, as is known, is still needed both in the UK and in Europe, and probably is going to be needed at least until 2040 and possibly as long as 2050.
And clearly a major part of this is exporting this coal that is produced around Europe to steelmakers around Europe. So where are steelmakers around Europe currently getting their coal?
Well, it was coming before the invasion in a lot of cases from Russia. Obviously, the European Union imposed sanctions and that trade has been blocked. So it comes from overseas, from a number of different countries, Australia being one, Canada being another. And the demand remains robust. And the other thing that we have seen this year, as everything that contains energy, even if we don't use this coking or metallurgical coal for the production of electricity, at the end of the day, we are using it for its energy. We're using it in blast furnaces for the production of steel mostly. And as anything that contains a source of energy, the price have gone really to very high levels. A ton of coking coal used to cost on average, I will say around $150 a ton, a metric ton. It's costing right now close to 300 tons. It was earlier this year as high as 500 tons. So every country, the UK and also our friends in continental Europe, are paying record prices to secure tonnage for feeding their blast furnaces.
Right. So if we were able to just lock in the prices as they were right now, it makes commercial sense. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, currently the market is very tight. There is need for that extra coal, and anyone can secure very high prices. Obviously, this is the market goes up and down.
Yes. Well, that's what I wonder. I mean, when you see all these prices go up and down all the time, Javier, is there a risk? I think I mentioned earlier that it's that effectively the permit, or they'll be allowed to dig for this coal until 2049. But is there a risk that at some point very soon the actual economic sense of the mine decreases considerably?
Oh, there is a risk, but the opposite risk is also there. I mean, there are very few investments in new projects. Many countries are refusing permits for new construction of new mines. And that could be an advantage for the British project. It's one of the few mines that they are going ahead. Most of what we are reading and reporting is about the opposite, about countries and companies not going ahead with projects. So it could have that advantage. But yes, as every commercial project, whether it's in natural resources or anywhere else in the business world, you face an uncertain future, and the prices may not remain as high as they were. If anyone have asked me, Sean, if you have brought me to the program a year ago, a bit more than a year ago, and you have told me, well, do you think that metallurgical coal is going to go to $500? At that point, a bit of a year ago, mid of 2021, the price was something around $120. So if someone has asked me, is it going to go to 500? I will have said, absolutely no way. And here we are. So yes, there is an uncertain future, but that is that's with every business.
And how does this tally? How does the UK's reputation for the push towards preventing climate change and these climate goals that were limiting climate change and these climate goals that we have globally now, how does this sit alongside that?
Well, I mean, immediately yesterday, as the announcement came, the main word that it was labeled to the United Kingdom was hypocrisy. You are telling us emerging countries, say South Africa, India, Indonesia, abandon coal, replace it from greener sources of energy. You told us that at COP27 recently in Sharm el Sheikh. You really told us at Glasgow at COP26 just over a year ago. And here we are, the United Kingdom, you are opening a new coal mine. So obviously, you are completely open to the accusation of hypocrisy. Let's not forget that the British government at Glasgow COP26, which was the big climate change, United Nations climate change summit that happened over a year ago in Scotland. One of the slogans of that summit was "Consign Coal to History." I mean, at that point, then Prime Minister Boris Johnson said that he wanted to put coal back into history, and here we are opening a new mine. So yeah, I mean, it really undermines significantly the status of the United Kingdom on climate change negotiations for sure.
Javier, thank you for laying all that out. Javier Blas, there, energy and commodities columnist at Bloomberg. Jane Sydenham with me this morning, investment director at Rathbones Investment Management. Jane, we got more detail on the housing market coming through all the time. Last week we heard from Nationwide and the kind of property sales it's seeing. Yesterday, Halifax said house prices falling at their fastest rate since after the financial crisis. We've got the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors research, out this morning, sort of saying similar to Nationwide last week. Not seen these kind of falls since the middle of the pandemic, but then you go back before that, and it's financial crisis time where it was most equivalent. Generally, do you see this as a major issue for the housing market? Is this a good realignment for people just trying to get on the ladder?
Well, I think it's obviously we're still this reaction to sharp rises in rates and the weakening economy. I mean, there are always going to be opportunities for those who've got the resources to buy at lower levels, but generally, the pressure is downwards at the moment because consumers and individuals are being squeezed. So, I would think we're going to see more negative data coming out with this survey, because it's about the number of inquiries for purchases. And the area that's quite strong, of course, is the lettings market. So, people are happier to take out a rental contract than commit to buy at the moment. They're just nervous about making these long-term commitments at this point with so much uncertainty.
And Mitchells and Butlers, they own Harvester, Toby Carvery, All Bar One, Miller and Carter Steakhouses, just summing up all of our weekends for us there, Jane. But what are they telling us with those brands about what's going on our high streets right now?
Yeah, I mean, again, we're seeing those squeezes, aren't we, in terms of the wage costs for those businesses and whether or not they can get the staff, and then, whether people are prepared to pay to kind of go out to eat. So, it's all of that. We're seeing the squeeze coming through. We're starting to see the reality of it, as we were saying earlier on.
Jane, thank you. Jane Sydenham from Rathbones Investment Management been with me this morning. Have you been waiting for the release of the documentary, the Harry and Meghan one? The trailer suggests high drama ahead.
I had to do everything I could to protect my family.
When the stakes are this high, doesn't it make more sense to hear our story from us?
Well, the front pages of the papers every day laying out the drama that is involved. It's part of a deal between the couple and Netflix that's reportedly worth $100 million to make content for the streaming giant, from documentaries to animated series, educational content. Alice Enders is head of research at the media consultancy Enders Analysis. Joins me now. Morning, Alice.
Good morning, Sean.
Initial reaction, Alice, just from the first couple of days of reaction to the documentary being launched. Do you think it's worthwhile for Netflix?
Well, it certainly is being billed as a global event, a global media event. And we'll get to see the three, initial series, the three initial episodes today, and then the next episodes in a week. And of course, it's been pumped up and made potentially very controversial, of course, for the royal family here. But one has to see this through the lens of the US market, which is, of course, the heartland of Netflix. And in the US, of course, the whole story is being seen as a kind of personal view, an entry into their home, their incredible love story, and all the rest of it. And so Netflix, I think, in the trailers certainly has pumped up the controversy and the extraordinary nature of this love affair, and of course an explanation of why they left the UK and so on.
And all of that drama. I just wonder whether you think, Alice, in the numbers that you'll watch so closely, will it hold on to subscribers? Will it bring in subscribers for Netflix, do you think?
Well, every time Netflix drops a big series, Stranger Things, of course, being the classic, it does tend to drive people back to Netflix, whether they're existing subscribers or new subscribers, because we know a lot of people are turning Netflix on and off. I think, whether or not it's going to actually pick up an awful lot of subscribers on the back of this documentary is more debatable. But it's certainly, from a global perspective, I mean, the way they've gone about it, I mean, it's certainly a major marketing device for sure, in terms of trying to drive people back to Netflix. So whether it will have a really material impact, I think, is more debatable.
If there ends up being, as there already is, a big negative reaction from large chunks of the UK, could it be detrimental to Netflix?
I think it's here in the UK, there's about 14 million subscribers here. It's very mature in the UK. I wouldn't really expect there to be much gain or loss in terms of subscribers. I think people will actually watch it out of sheer curiosity rather than because they love the story or they love Harry and Meghan. So I think in this country, there will certainly be a lot of people watching it, even if they don't like the story and they don't feel very comfortable about the way in which, the royal family is handled. So I think
you have to watch it, I guess, Alice. Your job.
Yes. We're just going to have to all watch it. That's all there is to it.
Great. We'll get you on again soon for a review as well, both numbers and the content. Thank you so much. Alice Enders there, Head of Research at the media consultancy Enders Analysis. Very interesting how that could be a real big deal for Netflix in the United States, if you're wondering why on earth they've done that here in the UK. Big thanks to Claire Daniels, who's been with me on the show.
Wake Up to Money from BBC 5 Live.
That's it from Wake Up to Money. You can download the podcast every Monday to Friday, so please make sure you subscribe. We'd also love it if you left us a review when you do. Get in touch, keep the conversation going anytime as well on social media. Use the hashtag Wake Up to Money.
The 2022 FIFA World Cup is Qatar.
Controversial FIFA president Sepp Blatter swept back to power.
The main news on 5 Live. It was the wake-up call no one at FIFA had expected.
Part deal broker.
This new modern age of even bigger money.
Part kingmaker.
It's for the unity of football.
Power play.
The House of Sepp Blatter.
What is a crisis?
Available now on BBC Sounds.
This week on the podcast Spark and Fire, visual artist Mark Bradford.
People always ask, well, didn't you know when you were in 5th grade and you were creative?
Mark has to learn how to embrace himself as an artist and find what he needs to create.
I didn't grow up like that. Thought it was just Mark being Mark.
On Spark and Fire, creators from different fields share their stories to fuel your creativity. Spark and Fire is a Wait What original in partnership with the BBC. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts.